All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I have been going through and creating a series of video presentations that are based on the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. We're in web forms and the advanced section. So, when you look at what we've gone through already, and thank you if you've been following along, we did the getting started with the web. We did the 3 sections under HTML structuring the web. We did the 4 sections under CSS styling the web. We did the 5 sections under JavaScript dynamic client-side scripting. Now in the web forms, we've done the learning pathway, and we're in the second one here, the advanced form articles. Now with what's left, like the accessibility guidelines and assessment, etc., I'm not going to spend too much time on that. What I want to spend time on what's left when we get to that point will be React. I'm going to skip Ember, Vue, Svelte, Angular. I want to spend some time on Git, on cross-browser testing, and then go into the server-side stuff where we're not going to go through the Django, but we'll have extensive time where we'll go through all of this Express stuff. And then there's further resources. We'll take a look at the common questions. And that'll be it. All right. So I went back and I'm using this one as my guide. And so I've done the how to build custom form controls, and now we're going to do the sending forms through JavaScript. As it says, HTML forms can send HTTP requests declaratively. But forms can also prepare an HTTP request to send via JavaScript. For example, via the XML HTTP request or XHR object. This article explores such approaches. A form is not always a form. With progressive web apps, sometimes called PWAs, single-page apps, sometimes called SPAs, and framework-based apps, it's common to use forms to send data without loading a new document when response data is received. It says, let's talk first about why this requires a different approach. Standard HTML form submission loads the URL where the data is sent, meaning the browser window navigates with a full page load. That's not always what you want to have. When you get a full page load, you get what's called flickering, where for a second at least, and sometimes more, as the entire page is reloading, you just get like a white screen and boom, and then it comes up. And again, like I said, sometimes it even takes more time than that. Many modern user interfaces only use HTML forms to collect input from the user, not for data submission. When the user tries to send the data, the app takes control and transmits it asynchronously in the background, updating only the parts of the UI that require changes. It says sending arbitrary data asynchronously is typically referred to as AJAX. All right. And again, I just want to mention this to you, especially now, let me bring it up. The book that we're using, or one of the books for this class, is the Muroc JavaScript and jQuery 4th edition book. The reason I bring that up is in the advanced class, or in the beginning class if we have the time, you'll notice we have an entire chapter on an introduction to AJAX. So this, even though what you're getting in here right now is micro-encapsulated and is just an intro, either in the AWD 1000 or the AWD 1111, database-driven web development class, in one of those classes, you'll be going over things like AJAX in a lot more depth and breadth of coverage. Now, AJAX has been around for probably a good 20 years. And the whole idea behind it, it's an acronym that stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Some books will tell you today it's not an acronym anymore. It just stands for AJAX. And the reason and rationale for that is today, more than XML, what you typically find used with AJAX is not XML, but JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. And again, we go over JSON a lot more in the AWD 1111 class, and you'll see it in the AWD 1000 class a bit at least as well. And that's what they're talking about in here. I'm not going to say that anymore. All right. The Fetch API, which we talked about in an earlier lesson or lessons, is often used today in place of XHR. It's a modern updated version of XHR, which works in a similar fashion but has advantages. Most of the XHR code in this article could be swapped out using Fetch. All right. If you control the front end, what's executed in the browser, and the back end, the code executed on the server, as mentioned here, you can send JSON or XML and process them in whatever way you think or you want them to be processed. But if you want to use a third-party service, you'll basically, in some ways at least, are kind of beyond, you have to be subservient to their whims. In other words, if they're using XML or expecting XML, that's the way you'll have to present it to them. So how should we send such data? The different techniques you'll require are shown below. There are 3 ways to send form data. Building an XML HTTP request manually, using the standalone form data object, using form data bound to a form element. So they're going to look at each of the 3. We're at 6.5 minutes. I don't know if I'll be able to get through this whole thing in this lecture, but we're going to try. So let's just call this XHR. So XHR is the safest and most reliable way to make HTTP requests. To send form data with them, prepare the data by URL encoding it, and obey the specifics of form data requests. So it says, let's look at an example. So you have a simple button in here that says click me, and now as it says, you've got the JavaScript in here. All right, so what are you doing? Well, you're searching for that, and basically you're setting a JavaScript variable equal to that button that you described or that you created up here. All right. Then we've got send data, and that's basically almost, you get a console log that says it's sending it. You're creating a new XML HTTP request. You're URL encoding the data. You're turning the object into an array. All right. You're combining the pairs into a single string, and as it says, replacing all of that's the way a space is going to be shown in your query string with a plus character. You define what happens when you were successfully able to submit. You define what happens when you're not able to successfully submit. You set up the request. You add the required HTTP header. You send the data. And then you have to associate the event listener. So that, again, that's saying that when you click the button, this is to be called. So, all right. The use of this XHR is subject to the same origin policy. It says if you want to send data to a third-party site, so you'll need CORS and HTTP access control. We're not going to get into that right now. All right, so next you can use the XHR and the form data object. So as they mention here, building an HTTP request by hand can be overwhelming. Fortunately, the XHR spec provides a newer, simpler way to handle form data requests with a form data object, which can be used to build form data for transmission or get data within a form element to manage how it's sent. It says, note that form data objects are write-only, meaning that you could change them, but you cannot retrieve their contents. So again, we've got the button click me, starts out the same, but now notice we're also creating this new form data. Then as it says, we're pushing the data that we have onto that form data object, where earlier we were turning it into an array of URL encoded key value pairs. Again, then we come in and we talk about what happens when we successfully submit, when we unsuccessfully submit. We set up the request, we send the request, and then we associate the event listener with the send data. Again, I can click on here. Now at least it's not giving me anything. All right. Finally, the third way was to bind a form data object to a form element. As it says, this creates a form data object that represents the data contained in the form. So that's typical, it says, but the JavaScript, again, we've still got this, we've still got this. We still got the success and the error, we still send, we still open rather, and we send. Now notice, we access the form element using the get element by ID here. So it says, send me your name, John, send me. Well, again, it's not working the way we've got it here. Okay. All right, dealing with binary data. Well, remember, we've talked about this before, that by default, the system expects that when you send data from a form, the data that you will be text data. Binary, and text data can be read with any editor, as opposed to binary data, which cannot. Binary data is used if you want to be able to send images, PDFs, etc. Word documents, I guess. So if you use a form data object with a form that includes the input type equal file, the data will be processed automatically. But to send binary data, as mentioned there, there's more work to do. All right, and they give you some examples, some of which I've listed, some of which I have not. The least complicated way to send binary data is using the form data's append method. It says if you have to do it by hand, it's trickier. So they go through an example here. I'm not going to run through it anymore. I've never done this. All right, so I don't want to waste your time. So let's see here. Let's just see if I can grab this. So there is an MP4 file. Send me. I don't think anything's happened there. All right. So I did go through this sending forms using JavaScript. We did already do the how to build custom form widgets. I guess this is next, HTML forms and legacy browsers. So I'll be back with that shortly.